Welcome to the Deep Blue Podcast, brought to you by Cobalt Consulting. The purpose of this podcast is really to provide inspiration to future generations, but also to allow you to hear from experts within their field. Today we have a really special guest and we're delighted to introduce him very shortly. First of all, you might be thinking, well, what is Cobalt Consulting and who are we? So Cobalt Consulting is a leading consultancy company focused on Amazon and LinkedIn. My name's Sanjeev, I'm one of the partners here at Cobalt, and I've had the pleasure of working in business-to-business sales for the last 15 years. The last 7 years of my career I've spent at LinkedIn.
And hi, I'm Andrew McIntosh. I'm also a partner at Cobalt Consulting. I've worked for the last 20 years in various retail organisations, and the last 10 years I've spent at Amazon, working both in their retail team and also leading their Ireland business.
If you like this podcast, don't forget to like, subscribe and share. And if you'd like to feature on an upcoming episode, please do get in touch. We'll provide a link in the description below. Now, our guest today, he's a true veteran in the supply chain world, and I'm sure he won't mind you mentioning that. He's worked for some of the leading household names such as Tesco's and Homebase, and has gone on to found a really successful career in supply chain consultancy with a focus on sustainability. So our special guest today is John Callendar. So John, thanks so much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure, Sanjeev, as ever.
Thank you. Today we're going to delve into John's career, past, present, and perhaps some of the future as well. So John, would you mind just giving us a brief introduction to your business?
So I set up about 6 years ago. My focus is in helping medium and large size businesses to understand their problems and resolve them on the supply chain side. Much of what I do now is around the circular economy, and in particular how businesses manage their returns and warranty repairs. It's all about how you can extend the life of the product.
Excellent. Now we're going to delve into that in some detail as we go. But first, I want to take it right back to the very beginning. So, John, can you tell us about your first job and specifically what it was, what you enjoyed, what you didn't enjoy, and what you learned?
So, my first job was working for suppliers of fruit and vegetables into supermarkets. And the obvious leap was to follow a colleague and go and work for Tesco's. And my first job was buying wonderful fruits, mangoes, pawpaws, peaches and nectarines. And what I loved the most was the privilege of being in a buying position, because you could compare and contrast suppliers, pick out the best. And that was very, very different to working on the supply side, where you felt quite lonely, and it was difficult to understand how you compare with others in the market. And I think the big thing about working for Tesco's was the consumer focus, and using that consumer focus to transform markets. So the biggest thing I ever did at Tesco's was move fresh fruit juice out of milk bottles into cartons. You're probably too young to remember the fact that we used to sell fruit juice in cartons, but and that was a big thing, and it was all about being customer focused and working with suppliers.
Excellent. So some real experience there, first off into the supply chain world.
Yes.
Perhaps inspiring you to move forward into and specialise within that particular area.
Absolutely.
And then can you walk us through the rest of your career to date? So obviously some interesting brands that you've had the pleasure to work for, likes of Homebase, perhaps some work you've done with Karcher as well, I think in the past. Can you just walk us through your career to where you are up to date?
Yeah, so I think when I was on the buying side, I managed a number of different categories, and then really became a little bit bored and wanted to try and do something else. So I went and worked in a department called corporate purchasing, where we bought everything that we didn't sell to customers. And that was at the time when Walmart bought Asda, and Terry Leahy embarked on a whole change program called Project Future, and we brought in Gemini. And I worked closely with Gemini and developed a lot of change leadership skills, and I absolutely loved it. And then what I also did is go on the Ashridge Leadership Development Program, and that really encouraged me to focus on using those skills more broadly, and one day setting up my own business to do that.
Can you walk us through your journey in your career? Obviously, you've worked for some interesting companies. and then you decided to go and set up your own journey, your own personal company. Can you just walk us through that process?
Yeah, so I think the first big change in terms of that journey was leaving Tesco's. And I think that was a desire to go on and manage a small business, which I did. I had had the privilege of running the Tesco Nutricentre, which was a small joint venture. And probably naively, I thought that that equipped me to run a small business. But actually assisting a CEO of a business to run a joint venture is not the same as running a small business. So I went to run this business. The added complication was the two brothers who owned the business didn't get on. And I guess what that did is it taught me a very clear lesson, which is firstly to understand why you do want to make a change, and be true to yourself about finding the right place to go and do that and work with the right people. For me, the most important thing is who you work with as much as the work that you do. And that's what keeps me going. And what I enjoy the most about working is the people.
Yeah, that's a really interesting insight there. You know, the people often make an organisation.
Absolutely. And I think the initial move was then to go back into corporate life. I tried setting up my own business in 2008, but we had the financial crisis, and I had a mortgage, and it felt the right thing to do to go back into corporate life. So I went to work for Homebase. I bought a number of different categories there before going back to doing what I love, which is running change projects. And I did that just at the time before Bunnings bought Homebase. We all know about what happened with Bunnings and Homebase, but that was my opportunity then to go and set up my business, which I did in about 2016. And my first client was Karcher, a really interesting business with a very successful brand, and their problem to solve was all around returns and warranty repairs. And that was my first real project in that sphere, and that inspired me to do more work on returns, warranty repairs and reverse logistics. And the reason for that, as much as anything else, was a desire to do something for the environment as it was for commercial. And I think where you can be successful on environmental issues is where you make it a commercial advantage rather than just to make a passion that you want to do something right for the environment. So that was the concept of Green Sky. That's what I wanted to focus on. But I think my learning also was sometimes your timing has to be right. So it's not until more recently that businesses have started to focus on returns and repairs, either because they're failing customers and getting bad reports on social media, or they're starting to think more closely about their P&L. And the challenge with that is actually the costs of warranty repairs and returns tends to go across a lot of P&L lines, is quite hidden. And it's not until now that people are really wanting to attack that. And that forced me to be a bit more flexible about what I did. So I started to look at more general issues around warehouse capacity, how to improve processes in warehouses, etc. So that's how my business has come about.
That's so fascinating. Thanks for sharing that. And I love the mention there about, you know, Green Sky's focus on sustainability, the circular economy, and that's really where you've had your sort of your focus for what you do, and that inspires you to go on and do more. Now, arguably 20 years ago, sustainability probably not such a hot topic with some of the organisations, whereas today we know it's really prevalent and top of mind. Can you talk us through some of those changes that you've seen during that time of how organisations are more focused now on sustainability, and perhaps some of the priorities that some businesses are working towards?
I mean, I think some of it's led by customers. So customers are, particularly young customers, are prepared now to buy products that have been refurbished, whereas previously they didn't. They're happy to trade in products of their own online, be it clothing, etc. So much of it is customer-led, but then what you also got is businesses that have investors, and increasingly now they have to demonstrate their green credentials. And if you have your own pension fund, as an example, you can choose to just invest in sustainably orientated businesses. And actually, boards want to make their business attractive to investors. So there's now a expectation at board level that businesses become more sustainable. My view is the trick in that is it needs to be an integral part of people's objectives when they work in a large organisation. Just having a department that focuses on sustainability, trying to encourage people to do it is not really the route. It has to be embedded within people's objectives.
So as part of the culture, from the ground up, everyone's part of the same process and they all understand the objectives.
So when I was at Tesco's, there was a very clear mantra, which was you do anything which is better for customers, simpler for staff, cheaper for Tesco's. Now I'd imagine there's a fourth bit, which is it more sustainable? And that gets embedded into what you do.
And I guess with larger organisations, it's quite strategic how they think about sustainability. But for organisations who maybe don't have that scale, who are trying to figure out, what should be the first step, how would you sort of advise those businesses how to think about sustainability, how to just get started with it?
I think if you're doing a startup, you simply have to think of it from the very moment you start the business. If you try and overlay something like sustainability later, so if for example you're wanting to source a product and sell it over Amazon, then you make that part of the criteria of where you go and source that product, and you're very clear about what your requirements are. If you go and source a product and then ask them later, I want you to do this on sustainability, you probably don't have the scale to be able to influence that business. But if you do it at the outset, you've got a much better chance of landing it.
So John, I'm sure it's not all been sunshine and rainbows throughout the career.
Far from it.
There's been times where perhaps the shit has hit the fan and there's been some difficult moments to navigate. Can you just walk us through some of those challenges that you've overfaced? What would be the top one that you'd say would be top of mind?
I think it would have to be COVID. So that was quite a few years in having started up my own business. Our business is partly what I do on the supply chain side and partly what Louise, my wife, does on journalism and PR. And through COVID, her side of the business was absolutely fine. Farmers Weekly was being published every week. She had work to do, etc., etc. On my side, clients simply couldn't take the risk of investing money in something when there was so much uncertainty, and business completely stopped. I couldn't furlough myself. I was paying myself dividends. I wasn't paying myself a salary. It wasn't worth doing. What else? Yes, I even went into Sainsbury's and Tesco's looking to see whether I could do delivery jobs because I was so uncertain about my income. I started to sell energy-saving technologies. And again, businesses listened to us, but didn't necessarily want to invest in that with so much uncertainty. It was very hard to go onto site to do audits and understand where you put the equipment in. So whilst I was good at that and I was the only guy getting orders, that wasn't going to fill the pipeline to pay the mortgage. So we had to rely on savings, and then eventually business started to come through when life got back to normal, and companies started to invest, and indeed supply chain probably became more critical as a result of COVID. We all know about the Suez incident with the boat, etc. That led to one client expanding and then contracting the number of warehouses. So in amongst these crises, there's opportunities as well.
And how do you see, obviously COVID, Ukraine, how do you see that sort of playing out, and what do you think businesses should be thinking about with these kind of events happening seemingly more regularly?
Yeah, they will happen more regularly, and none of us know what the next one is going to be. But I think what will differentiate businesses is their capability to see opportunities and problem solve and be flexible. And that is more about than the people than it is about technology. And, a really classic example of that would be a business that I know about. Not that I've supported Johnny and Seb with Wine Drops, but they launched in COVID. Originally, it was to bring snack foods to market and make them available in tube stations, etc. They launched that at the time that COVID started. They then had a business designing and making available high-quality ingredients supported by chefs, and that was really successful, but had a life stage and timescale to it. And now they've got Wine Drops, but what that proves to me is that you have to be flexible and willing to pivot. And it was Johnny and Seb's ability to be able to do that set them apart.
Got it. And then the other one I was curious about was, you obviously started your own business in 2008, you said, and then obviously the banking crisis and whatnot had a role to play in that failing. What did you sort of take from that? How did you adapt? How did it influence your career moving forward?
I think it was a mix of probably two things. First of all, it was, I really need to go back to having a full-time job to have the income to pay the mortgage and look after the family. So that was the first thing. Because there was so much uncertainty, I remember at Homebase, we had the January sale just after Christmas, and we literally didn't know whether anybody was going to walk in and buy anything. So it was the right thing to take on a permanent job. I think the other thing was I'd had the bulk of my career in Tesco's, which was great, but it was a growth business. What I hadn't experienced was the challenges of working in a more challenged business and being more resilient. And also, I think it's not until you step out of corporate life that you realise that there's so much more to learn. And it wasn't the right time to do that until probably 2016. So yeah, it was challenging making those changes and pivoting, but it was the right thing to do.
I think things like that where you see change that definitely helps you to broaden your career, and it's different experiences within different organisations as well. So that's really interesting to hear. Thanks for sharing that, John.
That's all right.
Going on to advice now.
Yeah.
So for anyone looking to perhaps start up in business, or when you look back at your own career, is there any advice that you wish someone had shared with you at that point when you were embarking on your own journey?
I think if you're starting a business, you definitely have to be prepared to be flexible and pivot. What you think might be successful and relevant, as per the example of returns and reverse logistics, it's always been relevant, but it's grown in relevance over the last few years. So you do have to be prepared to be flexible. I think if in my line of business is the big thing is about pipeline. You have to have a pipeline of potential clients, because with all the uncertainty, people are always saying, oh, I haven't got the budget anymore, or we've got other priorities, or something's gone wrong. And opportunities can seemingly disappear and then come back. Or alternatively, something will come completely left field. So always use your contacts, get to know people, be prepared to ring them up, have a conversation. Those all unearth opportunities. But it's for me, a very people-orientated business. So networking and pipeline are the two most important things.
So John, looking ahead, what do you see as some of the biggest challenges to business today?
I think it's likely to be political more than anything else. And we've had the scenario recently, haven't we, of the tariffs and the impact that has on business. So if you take businesses out of China who rely heavily on the US market, they're having to think long and hard about who they supply. And I think if you think back over the last 5 years and you look forward, I think one of the big lessons is if you are thinking about your customer base, don't narrow it down, have a breadth of customers, because that de-risks quite a lot. Similarly, if you look back into the supply chain, you would say have a selection of suppliers rather than having to rely on one source. So I think it presents opportunities. How politics is going to change, none of us really know. But again, you have to be adaptable. You have to have a low-cost business. And politics can be close to home or it can be far away. I mean, we've also seen the implementation of national insurance on businesses and what that means, be it in the supply chain or retail or restaurants, etc. That's a tough thing to overcome. But again, it's all about how you problem solve in those scenarios.
Absolutely. And you see those changes sort of occurring more often.
Yeah.
It ties back nicely to your mention about pivoting.
Yeah.
And Wine Drops as an example, having to pivot their organisation going forward. With all those changes and all those pivots having to occur, there are obviously advances in technology as well that are designed to help, things like AI as an example. Do you have any view on how AI might help or transform businesses going forwards, particularly around the supply chain piece?
I mean, I think I went to a presentation and there was a leading supermarket there that had tried to adopt AI within their supply chain, and actually they found it quite hard. And it may be that it's not quite ready for something like that. AI definitely has its sources, but I think it is people that will enable businesses to problem solve and realign their strategies. It won't be AI that does that. It can be a tool that helps, so it can help accelerate things. It can write code for you for apps, etc. But I'm nervous about people saying AI is going to solve everything. Personally, I don't see that. Maybe I'm a bit too old, but that would be my view of the world.
No, absolutely. I think it's always important to have that human element to an organisation. AI absolutely has its benefits, perhaps for replacing the mundane work or the day-to-day work, but it's not without its fallacies, right? It's not the be-all and end-all. It's not without its inaccuracies as well. So, yeah, interesting points there around still having that human element. The humans will still be at the centre of what you do.
If you take your area of LinkedIn is a really good tool to help open up discussions, but actually bringing those to fruition relies on human contact and actually people being authentic and people believing in you as a person. And that's really important when you're doing consulting work, etc. In my area is people will do business with you because it's you, not just about what you do. And that's where repeat purchases come in. So
it's about your personal brand.
Correct.
And I think a lot of people now are wise to spotting when AI has been used in perhaps some outreach or communications as well. And I think it has an adverse effect from that standpoint. It's really interesting to hear.
Good.
So John, we're going to move on to the final segment now. We're going to wrap up. Again, thanks for joining us this morning. Is there one thing that you can't live without in the professional capacity? So a book, podcast, day-to-day activity that you do. What's one thing that you say you really sort of can't live without?
Well, if I was to ask my wife, she would say it's a list. So I have a list for everything. It'll be a list of things I need to do for work, a list of things to do in the garden, a list of things to run the tennis club. So yes, it's sadly a list. Very dull, but actually it helps keep me focused on what I need to deliver on. So yes, lists it is.
The key thing with the list is how successful are you at getting through the list?
I am reasonably successful. Somebody once taught me that don't get too het up about lists. And the moment you have too long a list and you're not getting through it, ask yourself, what is the key goal for the week? And then just focus on that. So I've learned to balance it off a little bit.
Good advice.
We'll have to ask Louise about how successful you are completing your lists, but that's perhaps for another episode. But thanks very much for joining us today, John. I really appreciated your insights.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was John Callendar today. So a fascinating insight into his career with some of the largest, well-recognised brands such as Tesco's and Homebase, and then migrating on to his own successful supply chain consultancy business with a focus on circular economy and sustainability. Hope you found this podcast interesting. If you'd like to know more, please do like, share and subscribe. And again, if you would like to take part in one of our upcoming episodes, please do get in touch. We'll pop a link in the description below. Until next time, take care and we'll see you soon.